Well, good morning, Adam.
Good
Thank you
morning. Well,
for thank you for joining me in this conversation, conversations about life. And you are a part of the community at Jerusalem Farm in Kansas City, which I think is a really interesting thing. I kind of stumbled upon them on accident one time when I was couch surfing, and I
oh
ended
yeah.
up couch surfing at Jerusalem Farm,
Oh, super cool.
and
It's a good place to couch surf.
it was such a neat experience because I was alone in a strange city and not knowing what I was going to find. And then I happened upon this group of young people, and they were having a day off. A group of had just left. So
Okay.
we sat around in front, slacklining and sitting around talking, and it was just a really neat experience.
Super cool. I'm glad you were able to come here and enjoy
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah,
And thanks so
me
much
too.
for having me on as part of the conversation. Excited to be here.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining in. So, as far as an introduction, you were born in a small Appalachian town in Maryland, and
Correct.
in a large extended family. You're into books, good food that your mom cooks. Then you went on to school at West Virginia University, and you studied wildlife and fisheries resources and natural resource interpretation. You've taught high school
hmm
environmental science. And then you also have your own podcast. It's a sports podcast called Rossi Brothers
Yeah,
Sports Podcast. And
I do. Yeah, it's fun.
yeah, and then you're into hiking, music, and climate change is an issue that's important to you. And then anything else you would like to add as far as just an introduction?
No, it's a pretty good overview. Sounds like me.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Well, we can go just kind of anywhere with the conversation. Something that's important to me is just things involved with the Christian faith because I'm a
hmm
Christian and it's something I think about and try to work out, kind of considering, what does it mean? What's what direction should I go in? And just,
hmm
it's just kind of one of those foundational things of life. And
Yeah.
I think Jerusalem Farm is kind of connected to Catholic social teachings. So um, I think there is connections, but I don't know about you. Are you
Mhm.
do you identify with the Christian faith or with something
Yeah.
else? Or, okay,
Yeah.
so
I would
I guess
identify as a
just to get
Christian.
started, what is that like for you? How did you get started, and what is that like for you in your life as far as the Christian faith?
Yeah, good question. So, I'm a cradle Catholic, I guess, first and foremost. So, my parents are both practicing Catholics and still are. So, that's, I think, simple answer why I was Catholic, at least initially. Um, my grandma tells stories of like me going to church as a baby, and I guess she was impressed that my parents would take me when I'd be like crying and little and not convenient to take to church, but they still would. So yeah, I've been going to church for as long as I can remember, and from what people tell me before that. Um, but yeah, I guess so I went to Catholic school all through elementary, middle, high school. I'm really lucky to have gone to Catholic school, good old St. Michael's Elementary School, Frostburg, Maryland. Shout out, great school. No longer there, but it was a great time. Really lucky to have been a student there. And then I went to Bishop Walsh Middle High School, also a great place, and have a lot of lifelong friends. Hopefully, they're lifelong, but I still keep in touch with from that experience, from both experiences. Really, I have friends I keep in touch with in elementary school as well. So yeah, I was lucky to have faith and schooling, I guess, kind of intertwined all the way through my senior year of high school. Um, I was confirmed in the Catholic Church when I guess I was in 10th grade. Um, I remember at the time, it was probably the first time I really seriously was presented with like, hey, I guess the idea is like you're a Catholic up to this point because your parents are, but now you're supposed to like own that yourself, you know? And yeah, I don't know if I were like being honest with myself, I probably shouldn't have been confirmed then because I probably wasn't ready to. But I didn't want to like. I guess I'm kind of conflict avoidance. And I was like, well, it's just probably easier just to like go along with it. So like whatever. But at that point, I still probably would have said like I'm just Catholic as my parents are, you know, um, and not really have thought too much about it. I don't think. Um, by the time I was in college, well, probably late high school, I remember I started thinking like, okay, Catholicism is great, but there are all these other spiritualities and religions out there that are also probably great. And I remember I kind of, in my religion class, I was introduced this idea of ecumenism. So, like, all Christian churches being the same, really, which I guess they were, like, up to the Reformation. And I remember thinking, like, man, I can expand that into like everyone, like everyone's beliefs ever, that they're probably like just different ways of seeing the same thing, like the same truth, kind of. And I think that was my operational like theory about life and spirituality and religion for a while. Um, yeah, I went to college, was pretty involved in the Newman Club, the Catholic club on campus at West Virginia University. And I remember, man, I think it was my sophomore year of college. I went to see these two gentlemen speak. I think their last name was Muhammad, which is kind of stereotypical, but also I'm pretty sure it's true. They were these two Muslim um, NFL players. Actually, the one dude played for the Kansas City Chiefs, and I didn't think anything of Kansas City at the time, but now it's kind of ironic I'm ending up here. But in Kansas City, but they were both. I think they were both defensive backs in the NFL, but they were practicing Muslims. And the month of Ramadan fell during NFL training camp one year, maybe multiple years when they were in the NFL. So they were doing this tour, speaking at different universities because they had kind of been famous, I guess, for a time for. So as you probably know, practicing Muslims fast from sunup to sundown during the month of Ramadan, and that's no food or water,
Wow.
which is crazy to think about just in and of itself. But going through an NFL training camp, like NFL training camp, ridiculous. Fasting from sunup to sundown for a month, ridiculous. Doing both at the same time, like kind of absurd, but they did it. So I went to see them speak, and I thought they had like a really, really good talk. I mean, I really enjoyed it. So afterwards, I was like, I got to meet these guys, you know. So I waited in this line for a long time to talk to them, and I kind of presented my theory of like, so you know, I'm Christian, you guys are Muslim, but it's probably all the same, you know, like all these religions are probably the same. And I remember it was one of the brothers I talked to. He really kind of shot that down. He was like, no, they're not. Like, do you know much about Buddhism? Do you know much about like these other religions he was naming? And I said, no, you know, I really don't. I know very little. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I would read. Like, you should read about all this different stuff and then decide for yourself what's right and what's wrong, because I don't think everything can be correct. And that kind of changed things for me. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that does make sense. So yeah, for a while there, I think I really got into like apologetics. That kind of started making me think like, okay, maybe I should discern more deeply like what Catholicism is and if I really should be Catholic or not, because it's not just all the same thing. Then if I'm going with this dude's philosophy of you know the way of looking at things. So yeah, I kind of started diving deeper into like Catholicism, like should I be Catholic? And there was a priest at the church that I really, really liked. And I asked him to be my spiritual director, which is like the first and only time I've ever had a spiritual director. And I think I used that mostly to like get his thoughts on Catholicism and like, why are you Catholic? And I kind of got, yeah, I think our conversations turned into apologetics a lot, which I was into during that time period. It was interesting to me. He was all about Jesus, and he was a Benedictine monk, and was pretty, I don't know, traditional in the sense of like Catholic Church teachings and stuff. But I remember the one time I asked him, like, why are you Catholic? And he was like, well, really the question is, why am I Christian?
Hmm.
Like the differences between all these other faiths are like, in his eyes, minimal. It's like Jesus is the main thing. So like Christian first. And he goes through all his ideas for why he's Christian, and then gets into some finer, minute details of like parsing out Catholicism versus these other Protestant religions. And I like that. I was like, okay, cool. That for him is like this major division. Um, but yeah, I think a big shift then in my life came my senior year of college. Um, my my mom's really good friend, yeah, just a friend of the family, was diagnosed with breast cancer for the second time. She'd had it when I was in middle school, and then she recovered, but then it came back. And at the time, I was like, my mom, of course, was like, "Yeah, let's pray for this individual." And I was like, "Yeah," I was like, "Boom, prayer train! Like we're gonna cure her," as if like that was up to me. And let's just pray a lot. So I did for like a year. I was just like pray all the time, like say my rosaries and like do all this stuff. Like every opportunity I had to pray, I was gonna pray. And I remember the one time I went to mass, and the reading was one of those miracles where Jesus like cures somebody from being blind or whatever. And he says like, go and be well or whatever. Your faith has saved you. And I remember that line stood out to me. I was like, boom, that's it. Like, you just got to believe that this prayer is going to work, and then it's going to work. Like, yeah. And I remember I called my mom after that. I was like, Mom, do you believe she can get better? Because she can. I just heard this. I heard this reading today. Like, we just got to believe. We just got to believe in our prayer, and it's going to happen. It's going to be great. She's like, all right, yeah, great, thanks. And then she passed away. My mom's friend. So that was kind of like a gut punch for me. I was like, oh shoot, like that this is going to work. And and it kind of made me reevaluate a lot of life too, like other questions in my life, not just my mom's friend getting sick, but just like other things that I think I just thought were like guaranteed to happen. But then I realized, oh, maybe they're not, like we just have less control over things than I thought we did. And I guess you can have multiple responses to a situation like that. You can say like, oh, well, screw it. There is no God, it just doesn't matter. Or you can realize like, oh, maybe I'm being called to, a little deeper understanding of faith and spirituality and how the world works. So since then, I think I've like not really I haven't been so preoccupied with like apologetics and like, why am I Christian? Why am I Catholic? And it's more just like, I don't know, understanding God and like prayer and just like, who is God, or what is God, and how does prayer work? These aren't obviously accurate words to describe this, but I don't think we have accurate words in the English language, and that's like part of the mystery, is kind of always trying to discover this. But I think I've kind of shifted from like, what is Catholicism and what's Christianity, to like, what's God and like, what is life?
Mhm.
And yeah, delving into those deeper questions. So not that I have any answers, but it's just kind of, if I think about spirituality, that's tends to be what I think about.
Yeah. So, do you feel like you experience God in a particular way? I mean, if God is, then we all are experiencing Him all the time in some way, because He's giving us each breath of air we breathe. But as far as a spiritual connection, uh, do you experience that, or have you before, or what is that like for you, if so?
Yeah. Um, we do this thing every week at Jerusalem Farm called shared prayer, when we pass around this cross and we just share like how we experience God throughout the week. And I really, really like that, because I think for a lot of my life, I kind of thought that like prayer was this thing that you do that's like separate from the rest of your life. It's kind of like shifts in hockey. You can either be like on the ice or off the ice, and it's very defined. Like you have your ice time and you can like track that. I
Mhm.
kind of thought it was like similar for prayer. Like you have prayer time, and you can track like how many how many minutes per day you're spending in prayer. And I think, yeah, the shared prayer kind of opens me up to the experience that, oh, it's not just this like formal thing that like you say your Hail Mary and that's your prayer. You know, like you can experience God in many different ways. I think a prayer can be many different things. So yeah, it's really, I think, eye opening and good to hear how everyone experiences God. And people experience it in many ways, you know, in dances in Lawrence, or in planting stuff in the garden outside, or in going to a birthday party, or in singing a song, or just like so many myriad of ways. And yeah, having doing this for like a year now, I think I recognize that I tend to see God first and foremost through other people. I think that's the main way I experience God. And then I guess number two being experiencing God through nature, through the outdoors. I like to bird. I like to hike. So, and the best of both worlds, right? If you can be outside with other people, sharing that experience, that's probably the best. But yeah, I think that's generally where I feel most connected and grounded.
You know, you mentioned passing around the cross. So, what I know that's like the symbol in Christianity, the cross. So,
Right.
what does that mean to you personally? The the cross. Is it significant, and if so, in what way?
Yeah. Um, I guess maybe it should be, but if I'm being frank, I'm not sure that it is. Um, Probably just because I'm like almost numb to it. I almost like take it for granted, you know, because I've like there's a cross hanging in the house that I grew up in and went to Catholic school. So it's like, yeah, you bring up a good point. I probably shouldn't be numb to it, but I think I just am just like super accustomed to crosses everywhere because in my like that's all I've known my entire life. Um, but yeah, I remember a homily a priest gave one time that said like, man, wearing a cross around your neck in the early Christian church, that was kind of like wearing an electric chair around your neck. Like that was quite a powerful symbol. And I think his point was like, it still should be, but um, I guess a lot of people just kind of grow super accustomed to it. So yeah, passing around the cross, I guess I don't think too much of it, to be honest. Probably should. If there was a crucifix, if there's like a dead Jesus hanging from the cross, I'd probably be a little more like in your face, like, oh.
Yeah.
But I feel like 9 out of 10 crosses I experience don't have Jesus hanging from it. It's just a cross. And obviously it's a symbol of something more. I'm in the chapel right now. I'm looking at some crosses around here. And yeah, none of them are a crucifix. Um, but yeah, I guess I don't really think a whole lot about it. Specifically with our shared prayer cross, I think of Jerusalem Farm, and I think of the experiences of people here, which I hold really dear, and try to be present in those moments. You know, like I don't know what life's going to hold, but I'm trying to enjoy every moment I have here and
Right.
enjoy every shared prayer I have here. So I definitely think about that when we pass around the shared prayer cross.
Right. My background is Protestant, and I think that Protestants probably focus more on like St. Paul's letters and the other New
Mhm.
Testament letters, which has an emphasis on Jesus's death being an atoning sacrifice. And
Mhm.
my impression from Catholics is maybe um, the Catholic focus might be a little bit more on like the Gospels of Jesus, which is
Mhm.
not like a explanation, but it's more of a story, a narrative of
Mhm.
Jesus's teaching life and then his death and resurrection. But from
Right, right.
a Protestant viewpoint, like when I think of the cross or or the death of Jesus, I'm thinking of like a sacrifice for sin, um, and a standing before God, not on my own good works, like if I'm earning something to be able to be received into His kingdom, but more as like
Mhm.
I've been purchased. There's been a sacrifice made, and on that
Mhm.
those grounds, I can come forward with confidence and be received and um,
Mhm.
accepted and so forth. So is that a part of your experience of Catholic thought as well? You know, that sacrifice and um, kind of doing away with sin or covering sin, something along those lines.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because that's something I think I've heard pretty much from day one is like Jesus died on the cross to save you from your sins, you know, and that's like the line, and like by kindergarten I could probably say like if the teacher asked me like why did Jesus die on the cross, they'd be like save us from our sins. That's the answer,
Hmm.
which is the answer. I still don't really know what that means, like the theology of um, like how that works, like salvation,
Yeah.
the how salvation works. I really couldn't tell you, um, and and yeah, this idea of like being saved from sin is just something that I think I feel like I know just because I've heard it 100 million times, but I guess I haven't super. There have been different points. I think different opportunities when that point's come up, and maybe I've asked, or maybe the question has been posed, like, what does that mean? But obviously, it hasn't been that impactful because it hasn't really stuck with me. I couldn't really tell you what it meant, or what it means. I know it probably means different things to different people, um, but yeah, I guess like you said, that idea of like seeing the cross and this image of like, dude, I'm free from sin. I probably do generally. Again, this is stereotypical, not true of everyone, I'm sure, but I probably associate that line of thought with Protestants a little more than Catholics. But again, that's super general.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so a spiritual director, I hear of that among Catholics. Now, it's not like
Yeah.
something I hear among Protestants. Like Protestants, there
Hmm.
might be like someone might refer to someone as a mentor or something like that,
Hmm.
or someone giving me pastoral direction or something like. But in your
Yeah.
experience or among Catholics, is a spiritual director like, does that mean something real particular, or is it kind of a pretty broad term that basically means a mentor or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think it's pretty broad. I'm probably not the authority on this. I'm also probably not the authority on Catholicism. I'm not probably. I'm definitely not the authority on Catholicism. Like this is just
Yeah,
I'm the authority on Adam
right,
Rossi, but not much else. I kind of have a unique thing, like I have a unique experiences like everyone else does in the world.
right.
But yeah, I don't take this as like this is what Catholics say about this.
Yeah.
Not necessarily this is what I say about this. But yeah, like I said, I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic church my whole life. It wasn't until I was in college at a public university in Newman Club that I first heard of a spiritual director. I was like, oh, what is
Yeah.
this? And it was definitely a thing that like everyone did. Maybe not every single person, but like it was a thing at Newman to like have a spiritual director. And everyone would talk about, oh, well, talking to the spiritual director, he says this or she says this, or yeah, I just had this conversation with my spiritual director, which is not something that I again was used to, or something that I think I'd be like, I don't want to use the word prone to, but like um, it's not something I'd naturally be inclined towards. Um, I, I think the other community members at Jerusalem Farm here like kind of know me as I feel like there's a spectrum of like feeling and thinking, or like very sensitive and like not so sensitive. And I'm very much in like the not sensitive side
Hmm.
in life. So yeah, I know, just the idea of spiritual direction is something that like some people are just really like, yeah. It's kind of ironic that I mention this now because I'm talking about spirituality on this podcast. Um, but it's not something I'm naturally like inclined to do, or like when people like during certain rites we have at Jerusalem Farm, like oftentimes we're invited to like say like share something about this person we're celebrating, and people were like tear up or like share this like real deep stuff, and like tears are shed, and like that's just not naturally me. Like I'm not sure I've shed a tear since I've been at Jerusalem Farm or in a long time anyway, which is fine. That's who I am, and other people who they are, and that's cool too. But this is all to say that I think I wasn't into when I heard about spiritual direction. I wasn't like, oh, I need to find a spiritual director right now. I think I didn't, and I don't think I sought out a spiritual director. I asked this particular person to be a spiritual director for me because I thought we were similar in a lot of ways. Just as I really, really liked him as a priest, and some of the things he said, I was like, oh man, like I think those exact same things, and like no one ever kind of put it to words before. I just thought we had a really, we're on similar wavelengths on a lot of things. So I thought it was a good fit. All that being said, I think people use spiritual direction for different things in the Catholic faith, in the Catholic realm. I'm pretty sure our first spiritual direction meeting, this gentleman asked me like, so what's your goal here? Like, what do you want out of this? Like, why did you ask me to be your spiritual director? And I'd imagine that that's the way it is for a lot of people. And it's like different for different people, right? When I was at Newman, I think a lot of people, the spiritual directors, were a priest or a nun, or at least a campus minister, whereas like here at Jerusalem Farm, a lot of the people here also have spiritual directors. I think fewer of them or lower percentage of them here are ordained ministers or people. Like I think they have a more broad definition of like, oh, some dude or girl you think is wise could be your spiritual director, and that's accepted. In some circles, people would probably say no, it has to be some qualified person. They have to like follow these certain criteria. But in my experience of spiritual directors, it's pretty much whatever the person who seeks a spiritual director wants it to be.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your thoughts on that. Yeah, and like you were saying, I'm not looking to you as like an authority on the Catholic faith, but more as, well, someone who's got a different background and experience than me, and just an opportunity to talk with them and get things from their perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, what about confidence? Like it sounds like you maybe your faith was kind of rocked at that point when your mom's friend died, but then you ended up not just throwing it all away, and that happens to some people. A lot of times, it seems like someone who identifies with atheism or agnosticism, it's because of some event like that in their life. It's not just because they've kind of reasoned their way to that, though that might happen sometimes too. But what gives you confidence that the Christian faith is something solid, faithful, real, that Jesus really, there was a real resurrection, and that the Bible is a faithful guide for us, and things along those lines, or even just confidence that there is God. But is there anything particular that you go to or you think of when it comes to confidence?
Yeah, well, that's a big word for me. I usually think of myself as like not a very confident person. Probably why I host a sports podcast and I'm not a guest on sports podcasts. Like I'm not a great athlete, but yeah, I would also say as a corollary, there have been rough days in my life, as everyone has in their life. But in terms of like, there are definitely days I'd be like, God's a lie, like that's just all made up stuff. So it's not like I'm just this rock of faith. Like I've definitely been shaken, and I'm sure I will again. Such is life. But yeah, I guess to me, I think I'm a pretty, I don't use the word rational, but just kind of like reason through stuff. Like if A plus B equals C, then like I tend to reason through stuff that way. I tend not to talk about like my feelings a lot. Like I'm just more of a straightforward kind of rational person, maybe. So I think I had to kind of because of, life experiences, I think had to kind of throw away, or maybe not completely throw away, but amend my ideas of God before to incorporate new information, right? It's like the old scientific method, right? It's like if you do a new experiment and you come up with results that your current hypothesis or theory does not describe, then you have to go back and amend that theory to then take into account your new findings. And I think that's kind of like me and my spiritual journey is like, okay, now I've had these new experiences. My old way of seeing this does not account for this new stuff. So then I have to go back and kind of look at things a new way. So I think that's where it's like, okay, you could just throw it all away and say this is a bunch of BS, or you could, amend the way that you understand life. And I think the one reason I think have tended towards like shifting the way I understand life is because, and that is to say, it would be a shift either way. Like if I just said, okay, atheism, or maybe God's working in different ways than I thought God would work. I think I tend towards there is still a God. It's just that I, am called to a deeper understanding of God. Because I think, again, very rationally, like looking at the world, there is no great explanation of anything if God isn't a part of the picture. Um, and yeah, I just think that, science can answer a lot of questions. I was an environmental science teacher. I do love science, probably my favorite area of subjects in school. I like a lot of school, but science is probably number one. But and science can answer a lot of things about the world, but there are a lot of questions that science can't answer. Like what is love? Why are we here? Like what am I supposed to do with my life? Like these are questions that no experiment or no scientific hypothesis is ever going to address or answer. And even when we look at scientific explanation for living things, the world, there still isn't like great answers as to like there's always a well, what happened before that, like I think science pretty, I mean, as far as what I can tell, like pretty certainly points to a big bang, but then you go before that and you're like, what happened before that? Like there's this all these elements and there's this explosion, whatever. Well, how did that happen? Where did the energy come from? Like where those elements come from? Nobody knows, and so like even science has its limits. And I think I super recommend the book The Language of God. It's written by this guy who I forget his name. He was head of the Human Genome Project. They sequenced the
Francis
entire
something Collins or Francis something or that.
Yeah, it rings a bell. It's such a good book. And he's a Protestant dude. He's a Christian, but he wasn't. He was like an atheist at one point in his life. And he talks about how his basic thesis for the book is that science and God really complement each other. They're not like these two separate things. It's like you either believe in evolution or creation, or like it's God or science. And he's like, no, it's both really. And I really, really enjoyed reading that, and I think I have been informed by a lot of what he wrote in that book. But I think he writes in there, and I've heard in other places too, like the majority of scientists believe in God at the very least. Like most scientists who really look at things like these, super physicists who think about the world and like how the world is operating, the majority of them do believe in some kind of spirituality because that makes the most sense, I think, rationally speaking. Like science isn't going to answer a lot of the why questions.
Yeah. And it seems like humans just have some kind of a sense of God because they've, for the most part, have throughout the ages have believed in a God of some sort. Well,
I think it's interesting you mentioned that too. Like, yeah, throughout the ages we believed in God, and I think for me a big part of that too is like to live is to change. That's like one of those like guiding mantras for me. And for a lot of like human history and human recorded history, stories about God and creation have been to answer questions that at the time we couldn't answer, because like we couldn't use science to answer, just because like the world was not developed yet. So we had to answer them with these spiritual things. For example, like, why is there a thunderstorm? Oh, well, there's a thunderstorm because God is angry at us, so he's going to like make this thunderstorm. And that was probably the best explanation we could come up with at that point. Now, I mean, personally, I think it's kind of foolish to say, oh, God just magicked that thunderstorm to happen because he's angry at me. We have an explanation. Like there is a very solid scientific explanation for why that thunderstorm exists. But to me, that doesn't mean like, oh, then we just throw away our understanding of God and spirituality. I think it's, oh, now we have to amend our idea of how a thunderstorm works, right? And it's not to say that God didn't just, or it's not to say that God doesn't play any part in this thunderstorm. It could be that God is playing every part in this thunderstorm. It's just at a deeper level or a more nuanced level than just like some all-powerful dude created this cloud. It's probably a little more nuanced than that. Like there are a lot of forces in play that maybe are related to God, or that God set into play that then created this thunderstorm. Which to me is like a more kind of mind-boggling idea of God. Like, oh wow, like that to me is more impressive than just like, boom, make a cloud.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, taking a turn, relationships are something that's important to me. It seems like that's what a meaningful life is made up of, including relating to God, being connected to God, but then to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any, in your life, have you gained any understanding about our connection with one another or relationships in general that has been meaningful to you, that has made a difference, something you didn't know before, but now you know and it really matters, or just something along those lines? Any thoughts?
Hmm. Hmm. I think in many ways kind of an individualistic person. I've learned a lot about myself, I think, since coming to Jerusalem Farm. One thing is I'm a planner. Like I tend to have a plan and I try to go with that plan. And the struggle for me is not to plan. The struggle for me is to amend that plan when it's inevitably going to have to be amended. And a lot of that plan, for better, for worse, for a lot of my life hasn't taken into account like others very often. I'm just like, all right, this is me, you know? And usually when the plan has to be amended, it's because of other people, right? And I think the initial thought for me is like, oh, to like blame other people. I'd be like, oh, other people, I have to change my plan now. Whereas I'm learning like, oh, a life without other people is pretty boring life. And I guess to like prioritize relationships more than my plan.
Yeah.
When between 7th and 8th grade, my cousin used to live in Phoenix, Arizona, and we drove out there to see her in Phoenix. And on the way, we stopped at Petrified Forest National Park, and then we took her to Grand Canyon National Park, and we went to Bryce Canyon. We stopped at Santa Fe on our way back. We stopped in Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. We were gone for 3 weeks. It was the greatest trip ever in my life. Like, it was unbelievable. Got to see the Desert Southwest, only time I've ever been there, but I can't wait to go back. It's going to happen soon because that's like my favorite area in the world. It was just a super magical trip. And it's really the only, no, I shouldn't say the only big trip, but like usually in summer vacations growing up, our summer vacations were to family members. Even that one, right? We went out there because Christina lived out there with my cousin. So we went out to see her. And that's kind of cool. Like looking back on it, like I always had family. Like seeing family members was a priority. My mom's is one of 5, and her one sibling lives in Atlanta, Georgia, which is like 14 hours maybe from where I grew up in Western Maryland. All the other family members lived within a 4-hour drive at most from us. But even the family in Atlanta, we probably saw them at least once a year growing up. And it's probably only, recently I realized like, oh, we had to make that happen. Right? It wasn't just going to happen without planning, but that was definitely a priority to like see those people. And I love playing with my cousins and love hanging out with my family. But I think it's just something I kind of took for granted growing up. Anyway, this trip just stands out in my memory. It's like, whoa, that's a trip. And when I finally graduated college, I was like, dude, it's road trip time. Let's do it. Let's make it happen again. Go on a road trip. And they were shorter road trips. I went on a few just in the near where I grew up, a few through West Virginia. I went through Maryland. And all of them were kind of like, I was excited to plan it and excited to like drive for the first 2 days into camp. But after like 2 nights max, pretty much, I was like, I'm ready to go home. That's about all I got, And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh, that trip out to Phoenix, it was great, but I think it was great because I was doing it with my family. Like it's really the people that make the experience, not just the other way around. Like the experience doesn't make the people. So I think and that's still a struggle for me sometimes. Like, just to realize like, oh, let go of this plan and just be with people. But at the end of the day, it's way more satisfying in life to have deep relationships and to experience people. My mom, I'm just, I think the luckiest person in the world because my mom is my mom. Like I look up to her more than anyone else, I think, in the world. And I'm just really, really lucky to have her. And she's just teaches me in so many ways. But yeah, I guess within the last few years, I realized like, man, my mom is a really good friend. Like there are several people in her life that I can identify as like, not just friends, but like really, really, really good friends of my mom. And like, there's my one, we call her my aunt. She's not our aunt, and like uncle and cousins, they're not related to us, but it's my mom's best friend's family from like second grade. I don't know when they met. They met in elementary school, and they're still like super close. They live 2 hours apart from each other, but they like make it a point to see each other, at least a few times a year. And like they were like another sibling of my mom's growing up. Like that was another like family and like cousins that we had, even though they're not related. And yeah, I guess more recently I thought like, wow, that's cool, to have really, really close friends and like lifelong relationships like that. And honestly, I'm not sure that I do, if I'm being honest with myself. Like, man, I feel like I have a lot of friends. Like I have a lot of people I keep in touch with, a lot of people I like to call on the phone, a lot of people that I'm thankful for that have been part of my life. But I'm not sure I have any friends that are that close, that I can just talk to about anything, So I remember thinking like, man, I should probably make that more of a priority, like, yeah, just valuing others and their time. So this is a really roundabout way of answering the question. I don't think I'm not sure if I really satisfactorily answered it, but I think I've come to realize, that yeah, relationships are just super, super important. And not only that, but like, I think it takes some intentional effort to build relationships. It's not something that is going to happen automatically. It maybe will happen automatically to a certain extent. My own life as an example, I have a lot of friends, but to get to that next level in a relationship, that's something that I think takes more intentionality.
Yeah. I think it takes longevity too, that time just somehow
Mm-hmm.
adds to a relationship. It's not just information. Like if I do a podcast with someone, I might, who knows where we might go? We might talk about things even their friends might not know about them, but that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily mean, okay, now I'm their best friend. It might be it's a start of a
Right.
relationship, but it just seems like time. I have one friend who I've been kind of staying pretty closely connected to for about, I guess it's been about 20 years now. And that friendship, even though I'm not sure we're the most ideal people to connect with, just time has added something to the comfort level. And he's someone,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I could talk about anything with, and
Yeah, that is a good point. I I remember one of my favorite series growing up, still now. I love the Sammy Keys mystery series, Gwendolyn Van Dranen, great author. But in one of the books, Sammy is talking about her best friend Marissa, and it's in one of the early books because this other girl who plays a part in the rest of the series comes along. I think her name's Holly, and they're doing something together. I forget what it is, but Sammy is all these books are written in the first person from the perspective of Sammy, and she's reflecting on the fact that like Marissa, like Holly isn't there as a friend yet. It's like Marissa and I had this glue. I remember this term she uses, like because we've had these experiences together that is just like it's like this glue,
Mm.
and Holly and I just have it like we're friends, but we haven't
Mm-hmm.
had those experiences together. And like you said, it's really a matter of time because by the end of the series I'm pretty sure she'd say that yeah, Holly is is just as good a friend as hers as
Yeah.
Marissa is. But early in the books, they just haven't had that time together. So
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Well, that kind of brings us up to books. Like you enjoy books. Um, has there been any particular books that have really made a significant, like a really an impact on your life, kind of life changing type of thing?
Yeah, wow. A lot of them. I was really, really lucky to have grown up, I think, at like the perfect time. Um, and that is to say that we got accelerated reader at my school. I think my mom played a part in that. So another thing I have to thank her for. When I was in first grade, I remember having this assembly and Miss Garlis, the gym teacher, I just remember her being covered in toilet paper. For some reason, that was supposed to get us interested in books. It sticks out in my memory, so maybe it did. I had like certain parents dress up as the Berenstain Bears. I don't know, just this assembly when I was in first grade in the hall at St. Michael's School. But yeah, I started reading after that because the idea of accelerated reader is you read a book, you take a test on it. It's worth a certain amount of points. If depending on how you do on the test, you get either all the points or a portion of the points if you pass the test, and then you can exchange those points at certain points during the year for prizes. And the prizes are either like, oh, these cool little highlighters, or young kids just like free stuff. I guess everyone likes free stuff. Um, but also like experiences. So like a sleepover at Mrs. Engel's house in third grade, or a fishing trip with Mr. Engel, also in third grade. Mrs. Engel had some pretty cool accelerated reader prizes, but that really got me hooked on reading. So I was in second grade. I remember coming into school one day, and Alex Barkley sits right behind me. We were like pretty best friends for a while there, and she's like, "Yo, my brother walked into a lamppost last night on the way home from this party because he was reading this book, and here it was the fourth Harry Potter book, and he had gone to this book release party and couldn't wait to get home. They live like I don't know, 10-minute walk from this bookstore, but he couldn't wait to get home to read the book. He had to read it while he was walking and walk to the lamppost, which Alex thought was pretty funny. And I also thought, but I also remember thinking like, man, if he couldn't wait to get home to read this book, it's probably a pretty good book. So up to that point, I had read like these like easy reader Bible stories. And I remember I went home that day and I was like, man, I'm going to read Harry Potter. So I did. I just like got the first Harry Potter book and started reading it. I'm sure there were words in there that I had asked my parents about to the point they were probably pretty annoyed with me, but I kind of learned to read that way. And by the end of the first Harry Potter book, I was like, all right, ready for the second, and just read the Harry Potter books. And then I was alive and like the perfect age for the fifth, sixth, and seventh books to come out. And I remember going to those like book release parties and just it being just a super easy conversation. I felt like all my friends also read Harry Potter and also were really into it. And the magic of it was like you didn't know what was going to happen. So after you read each book, you're like, okay, what's going to happen in the next book? Especially after the sixth one came out, it said the whole Horcruxes thing. That was like, everyone had these theories for the seventh book. So that was just a cool moment, I think, to be alive. And I think maybe because of like the Harry Potter craze, people were just into reading. Maybe the same way that my dad talks about growing up during Beatles mania and people were just into playing guitar and music all the time. I feel like I was born at the perfect time where people were just like, yeah, it's cool to read. And so yeah, Harry Potter was super big Harry Potter fan, still am. Um, I would, if people would ask me what are my favorite books of all time, my kind of rote answer I think would be To Kill a Mockingbird and A Tale of Two Cities. I've read To Kill a Mockingbird like 5 times. I just think it's beautifully written, and yeah, just a I'm not sure. I think there are a lot of lessons from that book, but quite a comment, I think, on what it is to be human. A lot of
Hmm.
one-liners from that. Um, I love Scout's reflections throughout the book. She's talking about like, Atticus, I think they're like two kinds of folks, and or like, oh, now I think they're two kinds of folks. And by the end of the book, she goes like, Atticus, I think they're just one kind of folks. I'm like, you got some wisdom there, Scout. So that one's good. A Tale of Two Cities. I mean, people will give Charles Dickens crap for being very verbose, which is fair. He is very verbose, but I just think, yeah, maybe apart from the Gospels, like to me, that's the most beautiful love story I've ever heard. Like I remember reading that. I read the abridged version for the first time in fourth grade, and even being like a I don't know, somewhat callous, like unfeeling, unsensitive dude. I remember reading that and being like kind
Hmm.
of blown away. Like, whoa, that's that's intense, you know. So I've always loved the Tale of Two Cities. Um, More recently, I've really been into Jason Reynolds. I've, in a lot of ways, I haven't really matured from a reading standpoint after like late elementary school. Like I pretty much read the same stuff now in terms of fiction that I read in late elementary school. I don't know, a lot of adult fiction, just for whatever reason, I just like young adult fiction, and I still do. Like I could just go through all the Newbery Metal books and super enjoy them. And yeah, so Jason Reynolds, I'm not sure he'd self-identify as a children's author, but other people would, because he writes primarily about people in their young adult years. Um, but he's just such a good storyteller, and I think he's just really really honest. I actually had the pleasure of seeing him speak. He came to the high school where I taught at, and did an assembly there, and it was the greatest school assembly I've ever witnessed in my life. He was just such an
Hmm.
outstanding speaker, and told a lot of the stories about his books and like what the stories of his books were based on. Most of them were based on real life experiences that he's had, and I really just like him. And he's actually the national like writer laureate for the United States, I think, for like the next year or so. It's like a 2-year term. I don't really know what that means, except that he's like on a lot of podcasts, and if you Google him, you can see a lot of stuff. He's like on a lot of shows, and but like just listening to what he has to say, like pretty much every interview I hear with him, he like drops some kind of knowledge. I'm like, yeah, Jason Reynolds, that's
Hmm.
totally right. But I like what you're saying right now. So yeah, that's tends to be the stuff I enjoy. In terms of nonfiction, I guess I do read these days more nonfiction than fiction, and most of that does tend to be like either related to like climate change, or like I'm reading this book about gardening right now because I'm partly in charge of the gardens here, just to kind of inform what I'm doing currently, or just
Yeah.
interest. I like to read.
Yeah. Um, well, concerning climate change, so it's something you're passionate about. It sounds like. Um, so
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of one of those topics that seems um, so far away from the average person as far as like being able to understand it themselves. They just have to take other people's word for it
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
gap between just the average person who's not a specialist in climate science and then the messages we hear, which makes it a little bit difficult, I think. But just what would you like to say concerning climate change, or why are you? Is it such an interest for you, and just any whatever direction you want to go in as far as climate change?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that it's kind of hard for people to maybe understand climate change. You just have to kind of um, take people's word for it. I guess I would say that maybe to criticize the scientific community, I think scientists are really good at doing experiments and writing technical papers and finding things. Communication isn't necessarily a trait that scientists, I shouldn't say need, but communication is oftentimes lacking with the scientific community. And maybe to criticize the scientific community, I'd say maybe the scientists kind of dropped the ball on communicating the idea of climate change. This is all to say it's really not that complicated. Like it's pretty straightforward physics, in terms of like why. the climate is warming. Like there's greenhouse gases, burning carbon puts more of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It's going to trap more heat. That's it. Like that's really, really straightforward. But, you know, I guess just the history is one of, I mean, it predates the internet. So I'm not sure if that's a good or bad thing because, internet's good at communicating information, but it's also good at communicating incorrect information. So I'm not sure how much that has to do with it. But like, for whatever reason, I guess there are lots of reasons in play. Like the fossil fuel industry was way better at communicating misinformation about climate change than the scientific community was about communicating actual information about climate change. As I'm talking about this, probably has a lot to do with money, right? Like the fossil fuel industry had to, like their bottom line was at stake. They sell carbon. Carbon's the problem. So it's like, all right, as fossil fuel industries with a crap ton of money, it pays for us to invest a lot of money in spreading misinformation about climate change so that people think like, oh, this is maybe just a question, like it's not really scientifically grounded, which by the way it
But
is.
can I just interrupt you for a
Or
minute or a second? What,
mhm,
as far as misinformation, is there something particular you're talking
mhm.
about? Like if you were to put that in a nutshell, what would the misinformation statement be, do you think?
I think it would be that climate change. I think it's to emphasize the uncertainty of science, and that I think generally speaking, I mean, there's a lot of shady things that the fossil fuel industry has done for a long time, but I think their like kind of mo and kind of overarching thing is like we are going to emphasize that we're not sure about anything. We can't be sure the climate is warming. There are all these ads that are like in papers that like, well, if the climate's getting warmer, why is Minnesota getting colder? Like they'd run these
Oh,
ads in
okay.
like certain states and then show this data that showed like, oh, these states are getting colder. You can make data show anything you want, really. So like some of these might be that, oh yeah, for this 10-year period of time, the average temperature in Minnesota did get colder. Some of that might actually be due to climate change for reasons that they're probably beyond scope of this conversation. But they would, yeah, a lot of ad campaigns. And then I would also say just like the intentionality of denying the basic physics of climate change. So like, yeah, it's a little history. You can tell I'm kind of a nerd about this. But like as early as like the 50s, scientists were saying like, this is what could happen. Like physicists said like, in theory, burning carbon creates more greenhouse gas, which traps more heat. Like they were saying this in theory works. And it wasn't really until like the 70s, I think Exxon scientists, like Exxon knew about this and they were at the time the largest company in the world. And they were like, this is of a concern to us, right? Because this could threaten our bottom line. So we should find out whether this is like really true. Like is this theory or is this something that like, yeah, there's some pretty substantial evidence for this. So Exxon hired their own scientists to like go find out like, is this true? Like, are we actually contributing to the greenhouse effect by burning all these fossil fuels? And like, are these things happening? Is ice melting? Are sea levels rising? Like, is this really a thing? And so their scientists go out and do all this work and come up with this answer, like unequivocally. I don't know if that's how you say that word. Yes, like overwhelmingly, this is absolutely what's happening. And this is like late 70s, early 80s. So Exxon does what? They like make a huge effort not to let anyone know about this. They let some other fossil fuel companies know about this, but they don't let the general public know about this. So they like have this concerted effort to like cover this up and like, hey, keep buying our fuel. It's not doing anything bad. And then in 1988, 1990, I think Jim Hansen, NASA scientist, testifies before Congress. And to me, that's when a lot of the world kind of found out about climate change, is this testimony when he says like, hey, this is what's going on. World's warming. 1988 was this like super record summer in terms of heat, which is no longer a super record summer. Like there have been multiple summers since then that have broken 1988's records. But at the time people were like, oh, maybe it's a thing. Climate change is real. And then Jim Hansen testifies. Then people are like, okay, yeah, maybe this is a thing. And that's when the fossil fuel industry really vehemently said, okay, now people know about it. Now we have to, you know, emphasize the uncertainty of science. Well, we're not sure, which is true. Like scientists would say, like I would say this in my, class when I teach, if people wrote in their lab reports, our hypothesis is proven, that was always a point off, because you never, just in the way science works, you never prove a hypothesis. You support a hypothesis or you refute a hypothesis, but you don't prove or disprove a hypothesis. So I think science, or the fossil fuel industry, kind of jumped on that and were like, oh, great. Even though over 97% of scientists say unequivocally, like, yeah, climate change is a thing, we're going to like emphasize like, well, there are 3 out of 100 people who ask questions about this. So let's like, emphasize that, or, whatever it is. And then, and now even like still doing things like, even though I think now the evidence is out there, like if you don't, I hate to say believe, because it's like, whether you believe it or not, it's happening. But I would say that, fossil fuel companies still will like do shady things and like ad campaigns, to like the idea of a carbon footprint. Like it's like basically the carbon footprint. The carbon footprint was invented by BP, like the term carbon footprint, invented by a fossil fuel company. And which sounds like a good thing, like, oh, watch out for your carbon footprint, let's lower that carbon footprint. But really the idea that for BP, this is marketing genius. It's the idea that, oh, it's your fault, the world, that we have this problem because you are using our product and you should lower your carbon footprint. It's not our fault for having this product and promoting it and having the world's economic system based on this product. It's obviously you, the consumer's fault. So like something that looks on the surface be like a good thing, like, yeah, good for BP, carbon footprint. Really, it's like shifting the blame from BP and these fossil fuel companies to the average consumer who, I can't control that the world in general operates based on a barrel of oil, or that, like it's based on my income. It's like basically impossible for me to buy an electric car like 3 years ago, which is the last time I bought a car. That's not my fault. That's a lot of big companies with a lot of money on the table have a part to play. So yeah, I'd just like to see, I think, fossil fuel companies accept responsibility and do the right thing, which I don't know if you pay attention to life over the last 4 decades, I think that's a pretty ridiculous statement to make, to expect that, but oh well, here's to hoping. I guess.
Okay, well, I was going to say, it seems like a lot of the question is more, well, what to do about it. I think you just mentioned something about the fossil fuel companies taking responsibility, and I may have missed something you said right after that. You might have already answered this, but what does that look like as far as them taking responsibility, or maybe even a more pertinent question to me and others might be like, well, what should the response be for the common everyday person and so forth?
I should probably just like delete everything that or if you're listening to this, you should probably just skip over everything I just said, but that's too late because it's after I already said it. No, because like I think it's really easy to get like down and like, oh man, this is that's a reason that people, I think, don't like climate change necessarily, because it's depressing. Right? It's just not something that's like, woo, let's go run a marathon now. It's not a happy thing. But what I think is a happy thing is like, look, this is an opportunity to do great things in the world. Like there's a lot of stuff that is lost, and that's a shame. But there's a lot of beauty in God's creation that is worth saving and still can be saved, and that can be done while creating, I think, a better world for people in general. Like this could be a win-win thing. So all that being said, I think like my basic answer to like, what do you do, is go to drawdown.org. I'm not I'm not paid by drawdown.org. I don't have any connection to drawdown.org other than it's just a great resource. So Paul Hawken, it's kind of his baby, and Paul Hawken's a really cool dude to listen to. He talks about climate change being a blessing, not a curse. Which the first time I heard that line, I was like, man, that's a challenging line, you know. And but he would say that this is an opportunity to make a better world, because cool thing about climate change is it's associated with everything, really. And I used to think it was like all environmental things, like, oh, pollution, over harvesting, invasive species, these are all related to climate change, which they are, but it's way more than that. It's poverty, it's racism, it's all these social justice issues that are like these bigger picture issues are also part of this picture, are definitely very closely, I think, related to climate change. So, in solving climate change, if you're really looking for climate justice and to create a better world in terms of making this world livable for human beings in the future, you are also going to make it better from a poverty perspective, from a racism, classism perspective. So you're really solving a lot of issues at one time. I would say that when Paul Hawkins says this, I do think like, okay, for the people living in these like Pacific islands that are literally drowning, like your island's going away, they're probably not saying like, ooh, this is a blessing. So like, I feel for people, and that's a basic truth of climate change, is that the people that did the least to cause it are being the most affected by it. And this is how it gets into, poverty, is that, it's usually the poorest people in the world and the people that have the least access to the resources that you and I enjoy are the ones that, feel the brunt of climate change first and foremost. But yeah, I other than that, I do agree with Paul Hawken. Like, man, this is a great opportunity to like do great things. And his whole thing is like, who cares about the causes? Like, if you're still asking questions about the causes, he's like, you're probably not going to be convinced at this point. Oh, well. But let's focus on the solutions. Like, what can we do to solve this thing? And I think there are examples of people that might still, for whatever reason, probably politically, socially, will not say like, oh yeah, climate change is the thing, but they will be on board with certain solutions, not because they're a solution for climate change necessarily, but maybe they're a solution for some other issue they care about, or maybe just because it makes financial sense.
Yeah.
I think that's the bottom line. Like, if you want to get people to care about something, if it hits their wallets, they'll start caring about it. And yeah, I think the more you look at it, the more it's like, wow, climate change makes, like, doing things to solve climate change makes 100% chance in a lot, or 100% sense in a lot of cases, including financial sense.
Let me push back. Go ahead. Let me push back.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, sorry. So some of that maybe is a little convoluted because of subsidies that are in place for fossil fuels, which goes back to the history of fossil fuel companies carrying a lot of clout in political spheres. But even with subsidies in place, more and more, I think green technology makes more financial sense.
I want to push back a little bit and just see what response you might have. So I listen to Jordan Peterson. He's a person I enjoy listening to. And I recently was listening to him talk with someone, I forgot his name, but the podcast episode was just reasons to be optimistic about the world, what has happened and where we're, and how things seem to be continuing to go. And one of the aspects was just how so many people, like poverty, who were impoverished, are not impoverished anymore throughout the world. And I think there was a statistic where like the poorest sub-Saharan people nowadays have the same, maybe it was like food calories and so forth as what the people in Portugal did in the 60s. So it's kind of comparing the poorest now to like among the best, not, like 60 years ago. And so, in other words, things have improved for so many people. And it seems like And when things improve for people, they tend to take better care of the environment. When you're at that really low
Mhm.
level of poverty, it's more of life and death. You don't really care about the environment so much because you got more immediate
Yeah,
concerns. And it
for
seems
sure.
that um, uh, growing financially and being, it's come about through the in, industrial age. So, which is kind of built on the back of fossil fuels. So, in a
Hmm.
sense, it seems like fossil fuels has been a part of good and raising people to a higher standard of living where they can
Hmm.
um, have more time and resources to care about their environment. Um, so it
Right.
makes like what to do about it a little bit confusing. For example, if we were go to alternative sources of energy, if that made financial sense, if that was uh,
Hmm.
economical and a good, then that would be an incentive and would make sense. But if it's going to make it harder for people to produce and so forth, then it might hamper uh, people's people's wealth throughout the world. They're rising up and them getting to a place where they can kind of care more for the environment and stuff. It seems to me like it kind of makes the response more complicated. And anyway, do you have any thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, that last thing you said is really interesting. How it could make maybe people poorer, or yeah, kind of. So, I mean, you look at the world today, and that's like I'm really excited to hear that people in sub-Saharan Africa have as many calories as people in Portugal in the '60s. Like that's cool, and I think it's something to celebrate. And I'm glad that people are definitely doing good things in the world, and that's definitely something to celebrate. Um, at the same time, you know, people, you know, GDP in the United States has risen. Average annual income in the United States has risen. But if you look at like median income, if you look at the wealth gap, like the rich get richer, the poor haven't really gone up. The middle class, people talk about like the shrinking middle class. Like there is no middle class anymore. Like you have a lot of money or you don't have a lot of money. There's not a whole lot of like average people. And I think even on a worldwide scale, that is more and more true. And then you ask, like, okay, what's the reasons for this? Um, and I think one reason is that you look at these fossil fuels, you look at coal, oil, and natural gas. Some places in the world have them, some places don't. Where the country, what countries export a lot of coal? The United States, China. Countries that, not to say that China is this superpower. There are a lot of poor people in China, but China over the last 20 years has become a larger major player in world economics. Right, the United States has always been there. You look at oil, like you look at these oil rich countries in the Middle East, super rich. Like they're the countries that are above the United States in terms of these, like standard of living. So they're like these super rich nations. Um, you look at countries that are super poor, and what don't they have? They don't have these resources. They don't have fossil fuel resources. But if you look at the energy of the future and the energy that could currently be harvested, you look at solar, you look at wind, you look at geothermal power, where does the sun not shine? The sun shines in Haiti just as much or more so than it does in the United States. So I think the fact that it's interesting that you say like, well, maybe people could become like fossil fuels could hamper or transitioning away from fossil fuels could hamper people's standard of living. In the long run, I think it only improves people's standard of living, and really in the short run too. Having spent a lot of time in the state of West Virginia, coal companies, people in West Virginia are like coal, 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 friends of coal. But really, if you dive into it, it's like these coal companies benefited at the expense of a lot of people in West Virginia that are now living in poverty, because it's like these rich CEOs and the few at the top made the most money from exploiting these workers. And that's true, and that repeats itself so many times over the globe. So if you can get beyond these resources that only exist in places like West Virginia, and have these key players at the top who are super powerful, getting all the resources and benefits from that, and spread out, the people who can reap those resources, then I think all for the better. And that is, to me, green energy. You can put a solar panel anywhere. A solar panel is a miracle. You can take sunlight, which is free, which is always going to be there, and make power without burning any carbon. Like, this is perfect. Why isn't this happening everywhere? There are reasons why it's not happening everywhere. Most of them, like political and economic, but it could be, and it could happen very quickly. And I'm excited about that. I think the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about, some of the things you mentioned there, is that, again, I think climate change is so connected to all these other issues, and the more you look at it, the more I think we realize that, like, like coal burning power plants are so much more likely to be near, or a person of color is, I don't forget how many times more likely to live within a certain radius of a coal-fired power plant than a white person. Or there's just examples upon examples upon examples of how working to improve environmental conditions can also improve people's livelihoods and bring equality and justice to the world on a grander scale. So yeah, for me, I think it's a win-win. It's really a no-brainer. And yeah, let's work on some solutions. Go to drawdown.org.
Right. And just kind of transitioning one more time before we just kind of wrap up, you mentioned like a motto that you live by: to live is to change. I thought that was kind of interesting. So do you have different mottos that you live by, or is that like the main one that you keep in mind, or is there a few things you keep in mind? So I want to ask you about that. And also, similarly, are there any routines that you practice that are meaningful to you, that are kind of something you found that really kind of helps you navigate through life, or just keep important things in the forefront? So anyway, any thoughts on that type of thing?
Yeah. Boom. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. One more thing. Sure. You reminded me when you talked about to live is to change. Reminded me of something else. Talking about fossil fuels, you're correct that, fossil fuels have brought a lot of livelihood, a lot of good things to a lot of people. And I think the key is, like, they did do that, right? It's kind of like somebody said, we were talking about on the podcast I do recently, America's pastime. Somebody said, well, yeah, baseball's America's pastime. It's not its current time, though. Like, what does baseball have to do to remain relevant now? Who cares about what happened in the past? And I kind of think the same thing is true about fossil fuel searches to a certain extent. I read something about Rockefeller, the oil baron, who really is the founder of current modern day Exxon, Standard Oil back in the day. But like, if Rockefeller were alive now, he would be investing tons of resources, everything he had, into solar, because he was a smart businessman, and he'd know that, like, you can't operate on models that were relevant 50 years ago. You have to be planning for what's going to happen, what's happening in the future. So I would say, like, yeah, it's great that fossil fuels have done everything they have. And at the time, that's what we didn't know about climate change. We knew about, we can make these factories using coal, use oil, which has some super amazing properties. Like, a gallon of gas is a miracle. Like, you can drive 50 miles on, or more than that, on a gallon of gas. And it's just so compact and so energy rich. Like, there's a reason we use fossil fuels. But now we know that it's kind of like in the healthcare industry. Like, thalidomide was the thing that we subscribed to pregnant women, but now we know, oh, there are ill health effects from thalidomide, these horrible ill health effects. So we don't subscribe that anymore, right? And in the climate change realm, I think like, oh, we used fossil fuels in the past. We didn't know about the ill effects. Now we do know about these ill effects, and there's something better that we could use instead of it. So why not transition to that better thing? So that all is to say, to live is to change, right? And you're always incorporating new information and new experiences to inform future decisions and your current way of living. To, I guess, shift back to more like a life motto thing, I'm not sure I have any that is like, this is my all-time life motto. Like I've never really thought to myself like, yeah, this is my forever motto. It's more like just as you go throughout life, different things come and go, and you just kind of lean into different ideas at times. So yeah, over the last year or so, I think I've realized like, to live is to change. It's inevitable. And I think the next part of that is to live well is to change often, something like this. But yeah, just kind of reminding myself not to live in the past or to get caught up in nostalgia. I think my mom was the one that said like nostalgia literally means, if you go back to, I don't know, the Greek or whatever the roots are, it's to look back with pain. I'm like, I don't want to be in pain. And so yeah, it's something I've thought a lot about recently. Also, a friend of the community talked about the idea of a person versus an actual person, and that's something that I've thought a lot about too. Is like, I think we have ideas of how things should be and how people should be, and it's not always in line with how that actual person is. And like letting go of those expectations and just experiencing someone for who they are, not who you want them to be, is something that I always need to be reminded of. So that's something that's been on my mind a lot, I guess, in the past year or two, that I try to remember and live by. But yeah, I think at certain points in my life, there have been other like little phrases that have really stood out to me. And I'm sure there are others that will come and go as I go throughout my life. In terms of routines, I don't know. I am kind of a very routine oriented person, I guess you could say. I'm a runner. I'm not a very good runner, but I've been a runner for a long time, and I just think it would be weird not to run. I at least run 3-4 times a week. Yeah, it'd be weird to wake up one day and be like, I haven't run in a week. That would be a thing I'd notice. So yeah, I think just running is a good thing. It's funny, when I was home over Christmas, we played a family version. It was horrible in a lot of ways because my mom tested positive for COVID when we were home. So my whole family was there, like my whole immediate family, including my grandmother and my siblings. But for like the second half, I was there for like 2 weeks. And for the second week, we were all basically like in different rooms, quarantined, like seeing each other via Zoom, but like it was pretty awful. So my sister, bless her heart, she's awesome. And she was like, let's do this family Zoom game. Like we'll play the Newlywed Game on Zoom. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that at all, but it's like basically where newlyweds have to guess things about the other person, and the other person answers the questions themselves, and you see like how many the wedded got right about the person they just married. So we did this for different family members. And when it was my turn to go, one of the questions posed to me was, Adam couldn't go a single day without doing fill in the blank. And it was funny what all my family members came up with for me, because they were all like super, super true. I was like, yep, that is me to a T. So recalling some of these answers, I said breathing, which is pretty straightforward, kind of smart aleck answer, but the answer I would give. I think after I said that, my sister was like, oh yeah, you would put that. But somebody said my 5-minute workout routine, which is true. I probably can't go a day without doing. I just do like these little sit-ups, push-ups, like whatever. It's very, very simple, but I pretty much make a point to do that every day. Somebody said doing Duolingo, which is another thing that only takes like 20 minutes, but I try to make it a point to do Duolingo every day. I'm trying to learn Spanish, still haven't, but maybe one day. Somebody said blowing my nose, which is, yeah, really true. Maybe not so much now, but during the winter months, like my nose runs a lot. So I'm not sure that's a
Yeah.
routine that I choose, but got to have some clear nostrils. And then somebody said running, and I was like, yeah, running, blow my nose, Duolingo, 5-minute workout. That's pretty much me. So yeah, in terms of routines, that's probably what it is. And, just life in any job or work, or even if you're not necessarily working a job, like I think you just tend to kind of get into certain routines, which helps me. Like here at Jerusalem Farm, you get up, eat breakfast, go to prayer, work your work day, eat dinner, do dishes. I think it helps to ground me in a certain sense, and like I don't have to spend mental energy on like, okay, what am I going to do next? Sometimes I need to, and sometimes it's good to break that routine and just take a day off and do whatever it is you need to do. But then other times it's good just to like not think about those things, just kind of do things automatically.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of information, and some of it, kind of thought provoking for me. I really like the two mottos you brought up: to live is to
Cool.
change. I kind of feel like I'm experiencing that a little bit now, and it feels like pieces
Hmm.
getting thrown up in the air and not sure how they're going to come down and what it's going to look like, and but thinking, well, that
Mm-hmm.
could be growth, coming down a little differently.
Yeah,
Um, so
for sure.
sure.
If you don't mind, two more that I just thought of when you said that. Um, One, well, maybe just one now. They come and they go. But the one is just to like, okay, I know the two. One is trust the process. And I think Joel Embiid, who's a star for the 76ers, said this. And he said it several years ago. It was kind of like a joke thing in the sports world. Like, he's this big star on the 76ers team that's horrible. Like, they're really just complete trash in the NBA. And people would ask him after the game, like, do you want to be traded? Like what's going on with this team right now? And he's like, I believe in this organization. Like, trust the process. Trust the process. And the process is basically the 76ers in a nutshell. Like, just sold. Basically, we're building this team around Embiid, but we're really bad for a while and like kind of tanked in order to get higher draft picks to get better players on their team. But now the 76ers are in first place in the East. Like, I think they have the first seed in the Eastern Conference in the NBA. Like, they have very serious NBA title contention hopes. And Joel Embiid's still a star for them. And it's like, dude, that actually worked. Like, he trusted the process, and now like he's competing for an NBA title. So I mean, not that I think sports doesn't matter by itself, but it can teach us lessons about life, And that to me is like, oh, just trust the process, Like, a year ago, I applied for this graduate program I didn't get into, but now I'm at Jerusalem Farm and I love it. And at the time, I was like, oh, this is horrible. I didn't get into this program. What do I do with my life? But hey, trust the process. Something's going to work out. Just go with it. The other thing, kind of related, is the poet, like something Maria Wilkie. He's a guy, his name is Maria, but he wrote this. It's like Letters to a Young Poet, I think it's called. And part of the quote, I'm going to mess this up, but the part that really resonates with me is like, live the questions. And then it goes like, because someday you might find that you live your way into the answers. And it's like to love the questions like they were some open door of mystery. Or see, he puts it really well. But just like living the questions and realizing like, man, I'm not going to know everything, and that's okay. Just to like kind of embrace the question, sit with the question, live the question. I might live my way in the answer someday. I also might not, but
Right.
that's okay. Just
those are all really good
hope,
things. The trust the process. It reminds me of a saying I've heard, which is put yourself in a position to succeed. It's like you can't make success happen, but there are things you can do that just puts you into a position for it. It seems to me similar a little bit to trust the process.
right?
Yeah. Well, I'm
For
starting to
sure,
get
for
a little
sure.
bit of sprinkles right here, and I'm outside, so it's,
Oh, gee, maybe that's
yeah.
t-
Well,
a
thanks.
sign. Time to
Thanks a lot, Adam.
wrap her up. Thank you
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Will. This has been really fun. I always enjoy a good
Well, you
conversation.
take care.
I appreciate the
I've
space
enjoyed it.
to talk about whatever. Yeah, thank you. You too, Will. It's been great.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Appreciate it, sir. Bye bye.